Two men, one big mansion, lots of drinks, middle of the carnival. What could go wrong? We are just going to hear a story, right? Snap out of it. It's not just an ordinary story, and definitely not an ordinary storyteller we're talking about. It is Edgar Allan Poe, and it is his gothic revenge masterpiece, Edgar Allan Poe was an American poet, author, editor, and literary critic, but he is best known for his short poems and stories, particularly his stories of mystery and the macabre. In fact, he is considered to be a pioneer in the genre of detective fiction and is credited with creating the first modern detective story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. If you look at the period when he lived, it coincided with the Romantic period in England. Therefore, it is not surprising to detect some of the elements that we see in Romanticism, especially the predominance of imagination and the quest for something beyond this physical reality. This story that we are going to look at has a very, very simple plot. A man wants to take revenge and eventually does that. But it is Poe's creative genius that transforms this simple plot into something extraordinary. So let's start with the text to see what's there in store for us. And as with all the stories that we read here, we will first focus on who is speaking to us. Who is the narrator, okay? The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. So this is the case of a first-person narrative. The narrator is directly talking to us, and the narrator is the character in the story. Apparently, this narrator has problem with a person called Fortunato, and he has planned to take revenge because Fortunato has done some injury to him, some kind of insult. And then see how the tone of intimacy is increasing, intimacy between the narrator and the reader. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, now we don't know the nature of his soul, we have just started reading his story, but he wants to establish this rapport with the reader from the very first paragraph itself, as if he was to take the reader into his confidence. You who so well know the nature of my soul will not suppose, however, that gave utterance to a threat. So you all know me, you know that I'm not a person who gives blank threat. So when I'm saying that I vowed revenge, I am serious about it. At length, I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. So he was very confident, and his confidence kind of gave him this idea that it has to be without risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. Now, what is impunity? Impunity is freedom from any kind of punishment, any kind of consequence. So he wants to make sure that his act of revenge would not bring upon him any kind of consequence. He doesn't want to go through any kind of legal obligation or chance of being convicted. So he wants to have a foolproof plan this time. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. So when he is talking about revenge, he is trying to make us believe that it is some kind of justice he wants to establish. It's like he is the redresser of a wrong that Fortunato has done to him. And he says that if the redresser gets punished, then there's no point in that kind of a redressal. So he wants to make sure that he, as a redresser, does not get punished for the act that he's going to commit now. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. He also wants to make sure that while he is taking revenge, while he is performing that act of redressing, the person against whom he is acting should realize that this was an act of revenge. So what do we know from the first paragraph? We don't know anything about the exact nature of the injuries that Fortunato had done to our narrator. We also do not know whether our narrator is somebody we can trust or not. So this is a classic case of an unreliable narrator who is trying to gain our confidence and gain our support from the very beginning. And we have understood by now that in this story, we will only have his point of view and not the other person's. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. So, just like a typical criminal, he has never given Fortunato any reason to doubt him. So that now when he is going to do something against Fortunato, Fortunato doesn't have an inkling of doubt against him. And so this is also a story of deceit. He is going to deceive Fortunato's trust. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face. So it was like his tactics to appear in a very normal way, to smile in his face. And he did not perceive that my smile was now at the thought of his immolation. Immolation is when a beast is sacrificed. So it's like when somebody is treated as a sacrificial victim, that is called immolation. So we already know that this man is talking about most probably murder, because he's talking about immolation. And he wants to show this as a very acceptable action on his part. And then we will be given the very gory details of how he goes about it. He had a weak point. So the narrator is still talking about Fortunato, that Fortunato had a weak point. What was Fortunato's weak point? This Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared, he prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Connoisseurship means when you are expert in understanding the value of usually something which is very artistic, and something that is usually related to a very elite class of living. Fortunato was an expert in understanding the value of wine and alcohol. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. Virtuoso means somebody who is skilled in fine arts, and art of detecting quality of wine is supposed to be equivalent to the art of understanding painting or sculpture even. So we understand that Fortunato is an Italian, and our narrator is not very enthusiastic about Italians. So he is not friends with Italians, also doesn't like them much. So he says that Italians don't have this kind of speciality or expertise. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted. Now he's talking about Italians, that usually Italians are pretending, adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. So British and Austrian millionaires are usually experts and specialists of these arts or these qualities, and the Italians are only imitators. So we definitely understand that this narrator is not someone who socializes well. He speaks with coldness when he even talks about the British people and the Austrians. So we do have this feeling that this man, the narrator, is somewhat of an alien where he is living. This is not his home. He doesn't feel at home here. He feels excluded. In painting and gemmery is the art of understanding the value of gems or expensive stones. Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. So Fortunato had no idea about ornaments, painting, other things of art. He only knew about wine. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself and bought largely whenever I could. So we see that there is a kind of a similarity between Fortunato and our narrator, and that similarity is based on their mutual interest in wine. So this was the weakness which he was going to exploit in order to get Fortunato under his wings. It was about dusk. One evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season that I encountered my friend. Obviously, when he uses the expression my friend, he uses it sarcastically because he's planning revenge against this person. But he is pretending to be his friend. So this expression is both literally true because he is acting as his friend and is symbolically satiric because he is not going to be his friend at all. Now, what is this carnival season? The Carnival of Venice is usually an annual festival. It was first held in 1162, so it has a very, very old tradition, you can say. And it consisted of over 2 months of revelry. People used to dress in costumes, wear masks, and drink and dance and party all night. So Carnival, in a way, is celebration of youthfulness, of vitality, and it is very interesting to see how Poe establishes the carnival as the fittest backdrop for what's going to happen to Fortunato. He accosted me with excessive warmth, so he greeted him, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. So motley is usually the kind of dress, it was striped kind of a dress, which the fools used to wear, the jesters used to wear in king's courts. So in a way, motley represents the fool, and we have already understood that the narrator is going to make big fool out of Fortunato, is going to deceive him. So this dress becomes symbolic as well. And then he goes on describing the dress. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hands. I was so happy to see Fortunato, that this is the moment he was waiting for, that he kept on shaking his hands. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pepe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts. I'll explain this to you. Pepe is like a wine or a beer cask. It's like a barrel, okay? It has almost 120 gallons in it, and rich, famous people used to buy wine in bulk, in barrels, not in bottles, and they used to store them in cellars. So our narrator tells Fortunato that he has managed to procure pipe of Amontillado. And Amontillado happens to be a very, very rare wine of Spain. Technically, it's a dry sherry kind of a drink, but it's okay if we just remember that it's a very, very rare drink or wine that would really attract the connoisseurs of alcohol. How? Said he. Amontillado, pipe. Impossible. And in the middle of the carnival? So we all know that during carnival season, people drink so much that it's not very easy to get hold of a very good bottle of wine even. And Fortunato is obviously very surprised when he hears that our narrator has obtained somehow great quantity of this fine wine. I have my doubts, I replied, and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. So see, this is how the narrator is slowly playing into the weakness of Fortunato. Fortunato, being the wine expert, suddenly feels very interested, and he also gets a little flattered by the way in which the narrator is telling him that he is the expert. The narrator should have consulted him in the first place. Okay, so this is how he's playing Fortunato. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. And we see how Fortunato is not listening to anything anymore. All he is thinking about is the wine. He's saying, I have my doubts. He's saying, Amontillado. And I must satisfy them. Amontillado. So he's completely lost. And that means the narrator has completely won him. And look at the final trick of our narrator. He says, oh, you seem to be a little preoccupied. You are engaged. I'm on my way to Lucrece. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me. So he brings in the reference to a competitor who is also equally an expert in wine. And there is, of course, rivalry, jealousy. So he says, I'll go to Lucrece. He will confirm if this is really Amontillado or not. Okay? Lucrece cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. He doesn't have a sense of distinction. And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Now he is hitting hard in that line. He wants to make Fortunato very, very envious of Lucrece. And this is his strategy to make Fortunato go with him to confirm whether the barrel or the cask was really Amontillado or not. Come, let's go. So Fortunato really wants to go. Whither? To your vaults? My friend, no. So just like a typical criminal, he doesn't jump and grab the opportunity the moment Fortunato wants to go to his house. Instead, he wants to appear reluctant, as if it is not his interest. It is Fortunato's interest for which they will be going. I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Look, I have no engagement. Come, my friend, no. It is not the engagement. But so he gives another reason to Fortunato, as if trying to discourage him. But this actually makes Fortunato want to go to his vaults even more. He says, the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted, you have already caught a cold. The vaults are insufferably damp. You all know that vaults are underground, and often, they were built along the riverbeds and even sometimes below the riverbeds. So they were extremely damp, and he describes them as they are encrusted with nitre. So nitre is like a white mineral crystal deposit of potassium nitrate. Usually they are found in these damp caverns and caves. And these nitre, that gives off this feeling of suffocation a lot. And it is also a proof how damp the passages are in those vaults. So vaults are not these well-constructed rooms like you imagine in case of a bank vault. No. These are places to store wine, to keep meat cold, and often used as the burial place for family members. Yes. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado. So he is constantly thinking about the wine. You have been imposed upon. And as for Lucrece, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado. Now, Fortunato is already quite drunk, and it is easier to manipulate drunk people because their intellectual faculties are somewhat clouded. Okay? Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm. So it was Fortunato who was now pulling our narrator towards the narrator's house and putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person. I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. What is a roquelaire? Roquelaire is a knee-length cloak. He was also wearing this mask on his face. Why? Because the narrator did not want to give away his identity. He did not want anybody to know that Fortunato was with him right now. So from the very beginning, he is trying to make sure that there should be no traces, there should be no proof left behind, because he was targeting to punish with impunity, that is, without the fear of punishment. So it was Fortunato who grabbed his arm and pulled him away towards his house. What about his house? He must have a big house. He's already calling it a palazzo, which is like a palace. There must have been attendants there. No, he had planned that as well. So you understand that this act that he's going to perform is not out of impulse. It is very much a premeditated murder that he is going to commit. Why? Because he has made everything well planned from beforehand. The next part of his plan, how to keep his house empty of servants. That's very interesting. This man really knows the psychology of people. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded. They had run away. Why? To make merry in honor of the time. It was carnival, and the servants of the house, attendants, they also wanted to have their fun time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning. Now, if the boss is away till morning and it's carnival night, why would the servants even stay back? So they know that all they have to do is come back before the master comes back. And that has made the house completely empty of any witnesses who could have testified against our narrator. And while he told them that he would not return before morning, he had also given order. I had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient. Now, whenever such a situation arises that there are explicit orders, the tendency, especially when it is carnival, is to disregard them, especially when you are given this added information that the master won't be available to check on you. And there were no CCTV back then. I well knew to ensure their immediate disappearance one and all as soon as my back was turned. Now, they were entering the palazzo. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux. Flambeaux were the flaming torches. So this is from here that we enter into a very, very different kind of a world without electricity, a world without even the amenities we usually find in high-class living. We are not going to go and sit in the parlor or drawing room of our narrator, which is possibly very well decorated and all because he's so rich. We are going into the vault, and the vaults represent the subconscious of the house. Technically speaking, it goes underground. And so, if you imagine a parallelism of the house with the human, then the vaults become the deepest impulses or secrets that lie hidden underneath our personalities. And what are the sources of light that they are carrying? They are carrying flaming torches, very medieval, nothing modern about it. And giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway. Look at the description. They are moving through these suites of rooms and they're moving towards this archway and eventually getting into the vault. So this entire setup is what makes the story a Gothic one. Gothic is not about just horror or ghosts or supernaturalism. Absolutely not. Gothic is about this sense of uncanny, this sense of eeriness, a sinking feeling that comes when you encounter structures like this, houses like these, who have a very, very interesting and often dark past. So Gothic is very much about the structural aspect as much as it is about the thematic aspect of a story. So they are getting into these vaults. I pass down a long and winding staircase. All features are very compatible with the genre of the Gothic, and they are very much similar to the architectural style that gave Gothic literature its name. Requesting him to be cautious as he followed, we came at length to the foot of the descent and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. This is the first time we get to know the name of the narrator, or at least the family name of the narrator, and from now onwards we are going to refer to him as Montresor. So Montresor's family catacomb. Catacombs mean underground cemetery where his family members were buried. And this was a kind of a Roman structure who built this gallery kind of a place with recesses, at the site where the tombs were kept. So this was a very Roman style of architecture, and the Montresor family used to bury their family members when they were dead. So this was not just a storehouse of wine. The gait of my friend was unsteady. The movement was a bit wobbly because his friend was drunk, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. So the sound of the bell, which is usually associated with fun and frolic, kind of creating a jarring effect in these surroundings, because these surroundings are supposed to be very serious and filled with kind of melancholy, because you have so many dead people all around you buried there. But he is focused, Fortunato is focused on the barrel, the pipe. The pipe, he said. It is further on, said I, but observe the white web work which gleams from these cavern walls. So, well, there are white web work and all classic description of Gothic spaces. He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with two filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. What a beautiful line is this. This is poetry at its best. Fortunato's eyes are compared to orbs, filmy orbs. Why? Because they are getting watery. He's having cold, perhaps. He's having a reaction. And it can also mean that his eyes are dilated because of the effect of the wine he has had. So his eyes were not very clear. Later, nighter. So the web work which Montresor refers to is not actually spider web work, but the way in which the nitre, as I was telling you, the deposits, white deposits on the cavern walls, the nitres are spread in such a way as if they are creating a web, and they are glistening in that flame. So the moment he understands that it's nitre, the dampness kind of has an effect on him, and Fortunato begins to cough violently and so on. My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes, and then he stops coughing. It is nothing, he said at last. Come, I said with decision, we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. See, when he is saying all these things, we at first begin to feel that he is giving compliment, but then we realize that he is basically a very lonely man. He is possibly so left out of society that he misses his past days, and he is very much envious of Fortunato. But then we also have this second voice in our minds speaking to us, saying that Fortunato is respected and he is admired and beloved. Does that mean Fortunato is the good guy and not Montresor? Because it's a general tendency of readers to associate themselves with the narrator in the very beginning, especially when the narrator is so very keen on establishing a rapport with the reader. The readers usually do not consider the narrator as the bad guy in the very beginning itself. But then, let me ask you a question. Has Montresor given us any detail about what wrong things Fortunato has done to him? No. So, we begin to have this doubt that perhaps the narrator is not being a reliable one at all. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. Let's go back. You're not well, so and all that. But then he mentions that trigger word again. Besides, there is Lucrece. So, the moment he will mention Lucrece, Fortunato will say, no, I will go and test the Amontillado, no matter how far inside the vault I have to go. Enough. The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, I replied. And when he says true, it is also very ironic, and it's a case of dramatic irony, because Montresor knows that yes, Fortunato will not die of a cough, he will die of something else. But Fortunato doesn't have an inkling of what's going on here. So this is a classic case of dramatic irony. And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily and all that. And then he offers Fortunato a little bit of wine. Now, where was this wine? Everywhere there were bottles kept. It was the vault. So he offered him a draught of a particular wine, Medoc. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. So it was like the freezer compartment. It was so cold. And he took hold of one of the bottles and handed it over to Fortunato. Drink. And then he drinks. And that leads to further intoxication in Fortunato. So already he was drunk, and this adds to his intoxication. And they begin to talk about Montresor's family. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. I forget your arms. What are arms? Arms are these symbols, which are also called coat of arms, the symbols of these great traditional families. They were ancestral symbols, okay? And they used to have a motto, something written, which represents the value of that particular family or ancestry. So Montresor's arms, that is Montresor's family's symbol, is something that Fortunato is referring to here. And he says, I have forgotten. What's your symbol? A huge human foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. So he speaks in a very poetic way here. And the image is that of a foot crushing a serpent, and the serpent is also biting the foot. This means that if you hurt me, I'm going to hit you back or hurt you back. And what was the motto? Nemo me impune lascit, which means no one provokes me with impunity. That is, if you hurt me, I will punish you back. You cannot hurt me with impunity. Impunity is without repercussion, without consequence. So you have to be careful. If you hurt me, I will hurt you back. So revenge is the central governing principle of Montresor's family. No wonder he's left all alone. This kind of a family doesn't end up well. Who base their philosophy on the idea of revenge. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. And then they were moving on and on and on. And we'll also move on a little bit and go to the part where he offers him another drink and he finishes it off. And then something happens. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. So Fortunato, he grabbed that flagon. Flagon is like a short-necked bottle, small little flask type of a bottle. He drank whatever was in it, and then he threw the bottle after making certain movement with his hand. I don't know what movement. He didn't write it here. He just said that there was a special movement that he made. Maybe he made 2S symbols or 2-0 symbols. I don't know what. But something special, as if it was a code. Fortunato tried to check if Montresor knew that code or not. So what was this deal about the code? I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement. Again, he did that, something which Montresor could not understand. What was he doing? What was this special sign? You do not comprehend? He said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the brotherhood. There is the clue. That is, every brotherhood or secret society has a code. Like maybe there's a secret society where the code is to touch your eye once. Imagine. So why is this made? Suppose there is a big gathering and you go there and you see that somebody is doing this to you. Then you realize that, this person belongs to my secret society. because often these secret societies, they used to gather in small groups, and they did not know about the members of the other groups, but they were of the same society. Okay? So what did they do, these secret societies? Often they had different kinds of agenda. Sometimes they had political agenda, sometimes they had intellectual agenda. So what brotherhood is this that Montresor is worried about here, or Fortunato is talking about here? This brotherhood was the brotherhood of the Freemasons. Although the word mason means somebody who builds house, the brotherhood of Freemasons had nothing to do with that profession. They were a group of people who were scientifically motivated, and they had these secret handshake. When you shake your hand, maybe they did something with their fingers so that the other person would know that, yes, this is a Freemason. Why was this needed? Because these people, usually Freemasons, had these liberal ideas which were mostly, often they went against the church and what was dominant discourse of the society. So they gathered a lot of enemies. Therefore, it was very important for them to make sure that the person with whom they were sharing some kind of secret, they were actually of the same group or not. For that, these codes were invented. Now, the moment Montresor realizes that his special gesture, which actually was the code of the Freemason Brotherhood, was not detectable by Fortunato, Montresor realized that Fortunato was not part of the Brotherhood. Now, this was also very insulting for Fortunato because already he was feeling like an alien. And here it makes him more excluded because Freemason Brotherhood, it consisted of people belonging to the highest echelons of society, the highest intellectuals, the richest men. So it was a great honor if somebody was a part of that group, like people feel very honored when they are part of the Lions Club and all that. So this reference to the Freemason Brotherhood and the fact that Montresor was not a part of Freemason Brotherhood, that was an insult to Montresor, and he says that, no, I am part of it. You, impossible, a Mason? A Mason, I replied. Now, because he was not part of the Freemasons, he did not know what the code was. He thought that it has something to do with the profession of masonry, that the person who builds houses with cement and brick, that is a mason. So he thought that the sign of being a Freemason means you have to carry some kind of an object that would connect to the profession of masonry. So he was carrying with him a trowel. A trowel is the tool of a mason. And of course, Montresor was really laughing at it. What, are you kidding me? You're jest. But we will later on know why the trowel was there with Montresor. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so. So now he finally takes Fortunato to the place where it was a really dark spot and a deep crypt. Crypt is like this additional compartment that is carved inside the wall, which is the most remote. And then what happens? He says, proceed. Herein is the Amontillado. As for Luke Tracy, he is an ignoramus. So ignoramus is something like ignorant person. And then, while Fortunato was going closer to the crypt, Montresor finds his opportunity. And what was that? Fortunato was inside this crypt. So there is this wall, and inside the wall there is this compartment. So Fortunato goes there inside looking for Amontillado and the barrel. There were 2 iron staples there. Okay. So what exactly happens? A moment more and I had fettered him to the granite. So he was chained down. So everything was already there. As I told you, this was premeditated. It was planned ahead. So Fortunato was stuck inside that crypt and he was stuck to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. And then there was a short chain and there was a padlock. And he connected the links, and within a few seconds, Fortunato was completely trapped. Pass your hand over the wall. You cannot help feeling the niter. So Fortunato was so drunk, he didn't even realize that he was already stuck to this chain. And he was looking for the Amontillado still. True, I replied, the Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. So there were a pile of bones. He removes them, throws them away or aside. And then we realize that the plan is so well managed by this murderer that he had already kept all the instruments he would need to cement a wall and seal the crypt inside which Fortunato was stuck. And what happens as he begins to put one brick over another, and he here ironically becomes a mason. So Fortunato laughed at him that you are not a mason. And this is how real masonry would kill Fortunato. I had secretly laid the first tier of the masonry, so he lays the bricks of the first tier. When I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. Now Fortunato also was coming back to his senses now. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. So these are the moments when we are not just inside the vault of a house, we are inside the vault of one's psyche. What is going on inside the murderer's mind? What is going on inside the victim's mind? And the different kinds of responses that come out. First, Fortunato begins to moan. He begins to have this slow realization that he is trapped and there is no escape. There was then a long and obstinate silence. Obstinate means, why obstinate? Because Fortunato was a proud man too. He could not possibly realize and believe that he was actually going to die. And therefore, his silence was like a challenge to death. I know, I cannot be killed. I am Fortunato. And what an irony, the name. He's supposed to be fortunate. And that silence is kind of a commanding refusal to accept the fate. But too late now. I laid the second tier and the third and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. Now this is the natural reaction of the man who is struggling to free himself. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. It's like this man is having second thoughts now, listening to those violent movement of the chain. Was Montresor thinking about releasing his captive? When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel. And I finished without interruption the fifth, the sixth, the seventh tier. So these layers of bricks, one on the other. And with every layer, Montresor is hiding his crime from the rest of the world. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast, so the wall was up here almost. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the masonwork, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. He's curious. Is Fortunato alive? Dead? Is he okay? So the curiosity. And you remember one thing that he had said in the very beginning of the story, that revenge should be realized by the person on whom revenge is taken. Like, if Montresor takes revenge on Fortunato, and Fortunato does not realize it, then what's the point? So he somehow wants to make sure that Fortunato has understood that it was all part of a plan of revenge. A succession of loud and shrill screams bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form. Look at the word form. He is not calling Fortunato anymore. He is not calling him human anymore. He is calling him a form. As if that helps him have the objective distance. He wants to keep pity away. He doesn't want to consider his victim as a human figure, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment, I hesitated. That small little moment. Even Macbeth hesitated, remember? Hamlet hesitated. Hesitation is part of a criminal psychology. But if you suppress that voice, you lose your right to be redeemed. And Fortunato is not going to survive because Montresor knows how to suppress his hesitation. But this is one single moment when whatever little humanity is there in Montresor emerges for a flickering second. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. So it is like he was gaining sustenance from the walls. Why? Because the walls remind him of his family's motto. The walls reassure him that this is the safest place for him. This is his home. So he can be himself here. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. Him who clamored. He doesn't name him anymore. I re-echoed, I aided, I surpassed them in volume and in strength. The suffering of the victim is as loud as the suffering of the murderer. Because in the act of murder, Montresor is not just killing Fortunato. He is killing his soul. And this loud shriek that comes out of him is like the humanity inside him is screaming. I did this. And the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. Why? Like he was building an entire wall to seal that cavity or that crypt. Why would the last stone be the heaviest? Because the moment he puts this stone, there is no going back. This stone is the weapon of murder. The other stones wouldn't have mattered. This stone would cut off the air supply permanently to Fortunato's lungs. And this weight is very much the weight he's feeling inside his heart, not on his hand. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, as if he's still having second thoughts. But now there came from out the niche, from inside Fortunato's voice, a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. He is now himself getting scared. So the creator of terror is terrified. And that is the beauty of the Gothic. There is only victim. No matter what you are doing, you are committing murder, you are being murdered, you will feel the terror. You will never escape fear. And then look at what Fortunato is saying, like from inside. The last things that he is saying. A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. Oh, we will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over a wine. Why? Why is Fortunato laughing? Perhaps it's his last desperate attempt to tell Montresor that, see, just let me out of here and I will never tell anybody that you wanted to kill me. I will just tell that it was a joke. This is his last attempt at self-preservation. It doesn't really matter. Fortunato is going to be buried down there. The Amontillado, I said. Yes, we will be laughing over the Amontillado. Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo? The lady, Fortunato, and the rest? Let us be gone. The last attempt at pity. The last attempt at humanity. And that fails too. Yes, let us be gone. For the love of God, Montresor. This is the moment that Montresor was waiting for. The moment when he was sure that Fortunato has understood that Montresor is murdering him and he is calling for pity. Yes, I said, for the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called loud. He wants to know if Fortunato is still alive or not. Fortunato? No answer. I called again. Fortunato? No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. No sound. And we know that words are representations of human communication. Words do not exist anymore between Fortunato and Montresor. Only the sound of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so, really? Was his heart sick because of the dampness? No, he was in denial now. He was refusing to admit that this murder has led to a lasting feeling of gloominess in him. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I forced the last stone. It's like he's forcing himself, as if it is his heart which is there in the stone, and he places it there. I plastered it up against the new masonry. I re-erected the old rampart of bones. He arranged the bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requires rest in peace. Ironically, we see that maybe Fortunato is resting in peace, but Montresor, for these 50 years, has never been in peace, because he has always struggled with the weight of that last stone that he plastered on that wall. So, what was the main problem here? Why did he at all do this? Obviously, we understand that Fortunato, being the fortunate one, he was part of this elite brotherhood, enjoyed the best society, while Montresor, his wealth must have reduced over time, popularity reduced over time, felt like an outsider. And the way Fortunato speaks, we understand that he is an egoistic person. He must have insulted him with some stray comments, which he didn't even realize perhaps. But Montresor took it to his heart, and this is how he plans it all. If you look at the storyline, there is not much. And it is Edgar Allan Poe who makes us realize that a story is not about the story it tells. It's about the way the story is told. If you are a student who has this in your syllabus, you should be bothered about some questions, apart from very basic questions like Gothic elements and all. These we have already understood, where you have to talk about the catacombs and the dark, claustrophobic atmosphere that is there, the theme of murder itself, deceit, all these things. And you have to always remember one thing, that this term Gothic is basically related to architecture. So it is because of this vault, this structural element, that we have the Gothic manifested in this story. It is not just an ordinary horror we are talking about. And interestingly, there is nothing supernatural about it. So Gothic is not supernatural. It's not like ghosts all the time, but ghosts from the past also can be Gothic, like we see here. The theme of revenge is a very predictable question, and here the most important thing is that revenge is shown without showing the reason for the revenge. That is, it's like revenge is projected through the persona of Montresor, and the narrator himself wants us to believe in the justice of that revenge. So revenge is filtered out of everything else, circumstances, reason, effect, everything else, and shown us just as revenge. Narrative style, you have to talk about the technique that Poe uses here, where you have to talk about the unreliability of the first-person narrator here, the use of irony, and at the same time, the way in which humor is blended in, which leads to even more shocking effect when you look at it. And then the symbolism is there, of course. Symbols, the vault, as I was telling you, is symbolic of the subconscious of the murderer with all his hidden recesses. And this entire idea of revenge, it is shown as an act of judgment. How? From the point of view of the narrator, it is legitimate, it is correct, it is right. But then that stone becomes a symbol of his guilt, and the stone becomes the marker of his conscience. Other symbols are also there. Fortunato's name is symbolic, Montresor's name is symbolic. Montreur is, like, if you look at the meaning of the French word montreur, it means to show, and sort is fate. So Montresor is like to show somebody their fate. So Montresor here becomes the creator of fate or fortune or destiny for Fortunato. And Fortunato's name is so ironic. And the word monstre is also very similar to the French word, which is associated with monster. So that is a mental association you have. And then the carnival setting. And this is very, very important, because if you look at the way Mikhail Bakhtin talks about carnival and cruelty, carnival is an idea which is very, very intimately connected with the idea of cruelty. Yes, carnival is a time when normal life is suspended, when class distinctions are blurred, when the rich can act as the poor can act as the rich. But it is also the time when our masks are on and our vulnerabilities come out, and we are not afraid to show the darker sides because we are not identifiable or identified easily. And therefore, there is a lot of cruelty that is associated with carnival. And this is how Poe, way before Bakhtin, talks about it, writes about the cruelty in the carnival. And the idea of the fool, if you look at the tarot cards, the fool as the eternal victim and all, that has an added reverberation to it. So Poe's story is much more than just one man killing another man. It is a story with layered significance, multiple interpretations. And so it is very true that I must have missed a lot. Please write in the comments section anything that comes to your mind when you think about the small little things in the story, or if you differ in any way from something that I have said, and we can continue our discussion in the comment section. Okay, I don't want you to feel depressed and gloomy. I know it was a gloomy story, but this is how literature offers so many emotions to us. And it's not just about boy meets girl, live happily ever after. It's way, way more than that, right? I hope you have enjoyed today's class. The only way you can thank us is by subscribing to our channel. And if you want, you can share this with your friends. So till we meet again with a new video, this is Monami Mukherjee signing off.